The scorching Arizona sun beat down on John Hawkeye Miller's ranch, painting the endless plains in hues of ochre and rust. Hawkeye, a man weathered by years of solitude and hard labor, surveyed his land from the porch of his modest cabin. He was a creature of habit, his days a monotonous cycle of cattle, fences, and the vast, empty sky. His only company, save for his loyal dog Rusty, was Sarah, the young woman from town who came twice a week to clean and help with chores. Sarah was quiet, her movements efficient, her eyes often downcast. Today, however, something was different. As she reached for a bucket of water, her sleeve rode up, revealing a constellation of dark purple bruises blossoming on her pale forearm. Hawkeye, usually oblivious to anything beyond the immediate demands of his ranch, felt a prickle of unease. He pretended not to notice, but the image seared itself into his mind. He'd seen bruises before, plenty of them from bucking broncos and stubborn cattle, but these were different. They spoke of a different kind of struggle, one that wasn't born of the land. He watched her for the rest of the day, a silent observer. The cheerful songs she sometimes hummed were absent, replaced by a tense silence. He offered her a glass of lemonade, and as she took it, he saw more marks, hidden partially by her dress. A knot tightened in his stomach. He was a man of the West, accustomed to minding his own business, but something about Sarah's quiet suffering stirred a long dormant protective instinct within him. The sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the ranch. Sarah finished her work, gave a polite, almost inaudible farewell, and rode away on her old mare, disappearing into the vastness of the twilight. Hawkeye stood on his porch long after she was gone, the purple marks vivid in his memory, the silence of the ranch suddenly heavier than usual. The quiet life he cherished felt disturbed, and for the first time in a long time, Hawkeye felt a stirring of something beyond his own lonely existence. He knew with a certainty that chilled him that he couldn't simply ignore what he had seen. Like the start of Sarah's story, there's a lot more to uncover. Subscribe to our channel to make sure you don't miss a single chapter of The Lonely Rancher and the Purple Marks. The following days were a torment for Hawkeye. The image of Sarah's bruised arms replayed in his mind, disrupting his usual stoicism. He found himself distracted, his gaze drifting towards the road she took back to town, a silent vigil for answers he didn't even know how to seek. The quiet routine of ranch life, once a comfort, now felt like a cage, isolating him from the world and its troubles. He considered riding into town, but what would he say? How would he even approach the subject without causing further distress? He wasn't a man of many words, certainly not when it came to delicate matters of human emotion. He tried to rationalize it away. Perhaps she'd fallen, or it was a misunderstanding. But the sheer number and nature of the marks told a different story, a darker one he was reluctant to confront. Even Rusty seemed to sense his owner's unease, nudging his hand with a wet nose, as if offering silent comfort. The cattle lowed in the distance. The wind whispered through the tall grass, but Hawkeye heard only the echo of his own troubled thoughts. He decided he needed to see her again, to observe more closely, to find a way to offer help without overstepping. When Sarah arrived for her next day of work, Hawkeye made sure to be nearby, watching her subtle movements, the way she flinched slightly when she bumped against something, the way she kept her arms tightly wrapped around herself despite the heat. The air between them, usually just a comfortable silence, was now thick with unspoken tension, a silent acknowledgement of something unsettling. He saw a faint purple mark on her neck, peeking from under her collar. It was enough. The evidence was undeniable. His quiet life was about to become very unquiet. Hawkeye spent the morning meticulously checking his fences, his mind not on the barbed wire, but on Sarah. He knew he had to talk to her, but the words eluded him. He was a man of action, not conversation, and the thought of confronting such a delicate issue made his palms sweat. He decided to approach it subtly, to create an opening for her to speak if she chose to. He prepared lunch, a simple stew, and set it out on the porch table. When Sarah came in from hanging laundry, he motioned for her to join him. She hesitated, then sat, her eyes fixed on her plate. "Sarah," Hawkeye began, his voice rougher than he intended. "Everything all right in town?" She flinched, her shoulders tensing. "Yes, Mr. Miller, everything's fine." Her voice was barely a whisper. Hawkeye pushed a plate of biscuits towards her. "You seem quieter than usual." Sarah picked at her food, her fork scraping against the ceramic. "Just a bit tired, Mr. Miller." The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Hawkeye sighed, his gaze falling on her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. He could see a faint bruise peeking from under her sleeve again. He decided to be more direct, but gently. "Sarah, if there's ever anything bothering you, anything at all, you can always talk to me. This ranch, it's a safe place." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and fear. For a fleeting moment, he saw a flicker of hope, quickly extinguished by a return to her guarded expression. "Thank you, Mr. Miller," she murmured, her voice laced with an undeniable sadness. She quickly finished her meal and resumed her chores, but the invisible wall between them had a crack in it. Hawkeye knew he hadn't broken through, but he had, at least, offered an olive branch. The next move was hers, if she dared to make it. The following week, a rare dust storm swept across the plains, blanketing Hawkeye's ranch in a fine layer of red grit. The air was thick and heavy, mirroring the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over Hawkeye since he'd noticed Sarah's bruises. Sarah arrived later than usual, her face pale, her hair disheveled. She seemed even more withdrawn than before, her movements sluggish. As she wiped down the counter, her sleeve slipped, and Hawkeye saw a fresh, angry bruise blooming on her wrist, a stark purple against her skin. This one was undeniable, a clear mark of violence. His heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't ignore it any longer. "Sarah," he said, his voice firm but not unkind, "what happened?" She froze, her back to him. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the mournful howl of the wind outside. Then she turned slowly, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. It's nothing, Mr. Miller, just an accident." Her voice trembled. Hawkeye walked closer, his gaze steady. "Sarah, those aren't accidents. Someone is hurting you." Her chin quivered, and a single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. She didn't deny it this time. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air, a burden she had carried alone for too long. Hawkeye felt a surge of anger, a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. "Who, Sarah? Tell me who." She shook her head, a silent sob escaping her lips. "I can't. You don't understand." Her voice was a barely audible whisper. The fear in her eyes was palpable, a chilling testament to the power of her tormentor. Hawkeye knew then that this was bigger than just a few bruises. He had stumbled into a darkness he hadn't anticipated, a secret woven into the fabric of their quiet town. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not just a maid, but a young woman trapped, desperate for help. He knew he had to act, and soon. The quiet rancher was about to make some noise. This is just the beginning of Hawkeye's journey to help Sarah. Don't miss out on what happens next. Subscribe to our channel and join us for the rest of The Lonely Rancher and the Purple Marks. The dust storm raged on, mirroring the turmoil in Hawkeye's mind. He led Sarah to the kitchen table and gently urged her to sit. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of her fear. "Sarah," he said again, his voice softer now, "I can't help you if you don't tell me who's doing this." She wrung her hands, her gaze fixed on the rough wooden table. He'll hurt me worse. He said he would." Her voice was barely audible above the howling wind. "Who, Sarah? Please, I won't let him hurt you." He waited, his patience a testament to the depth of his concern. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she whispered a name, so faint it was almost lost in the wind's lament. Jedediah. Hawkeye felt a jolt. Jedediah Blackwood. A prominent figure in town, a man known for his booming voice, his shrewd business dealings, and a reputation for being quick to anger, though no one had ever suspected outright violence. He owned the general store and had considerable sway. This was far more complicated than he had imagined. Sarah then poured out her story, a torrent of fear and humiliation. Jedediah, she explained, was her uncle, her only living relative since her parents passed. He had taken her in, but his supposed generosity quickly turned to cruelty. He controlled her meager earnings, verbally abused her, and increasingly resorted to physical violence. He had threatened to turn her out onto the streets, to ruin her reputation in the town if she ever spoke a word. Hawkeye listened, his jaw tightening with each revelation. The image of the jovial, respected Jedediah Blackwood shattered, replaced by a dark, menacing figure. He saw the desperate truth in Sarah's eyes, the years of silent suffering etched onto her young face. The fear was real, and the threat even more so. Hawkeye knew he was venturing into dangerous territory, challenging a man with power and influence, but looking at Sarah, he knew he had no other choice. The dust storm finally began to recede, leaving behind a hazy, ochre-tinted sky. But the storm within Hawkeye was just beginning. He sat in silence after Sarah finished her story, the implications of her words sinking in. Jedediah Blackwood was not a man to be trifled with, and confronting him directly could put Sarah and potentially himself in even greater danger. He needed a plan, a careful, calculated approach. "We can't go to the sheriff directly," Hawkeye reasoned aloud, more to himself than to Sarah. "Jedediah has too many friends in town. It would be his word against yours, and with his standing, yours might not be heard." Sarah nodded, her eyes still red-rimmed, but a faint glimmer of hope now visible. "What do we do then, Mr. Miller?" she asked, her voice still fragile. Hawkeye paced the small cabin, his mind racing. He thought about the town's dynamics, the unspoken alliances, the undercurrents of gossip and suspicion. He needed evidence, something irrefutable, and he needed allies. "We need to gather proof," he said, turning to face her. "Something more than just your word. And we need to find people in town who will believe you, who will stand with you." He considered a few names. Old Man Hemlock, the blacksmith, a gruff but honest man. Mrs. O'Malley, the seamstress, who had a sharp eye and an even sharper tongue, and was known for her kindness. He also thought about the young doctor, Dr. Elias Thorne, a recent arrival to town, who might be more inclined to see beyond social standing. "It won't be easy, Sarah," Hawkeye warned, his voice grim. "Jedediah is a powerful man, but you won't face him alone. I promise you that." Sarah looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time Hawkeye saw a flicker of determination in her eyes, replacing the fear. She had found an unlikely champion in the lonely rancher, and a flicker of hope in the desolate landscape of her life. Over the next few days, Hawkeye began his delicate mission. He rode into town, not making a show of it, but seeking out the individuals he had identified as potential allies. He started with Dr. Thorne, a compassionate man who had a reputation for treating everyone with equal respect. Hawkeye explained in carefully chosen words what he had seen and what Sarah had revealed, emphasizing the severity of the abuse and the need for discretion. Dr. Thorne, a man of science and empathy, listened intently, his expression growing grim. He agreed to examine Sarah discreetly and document her injuries, providing crucial medical evidence. His support was a significant first step. Next, Hawkeye visited Mrs. O'Malley, the seamstress. He knew she had a keen sense of justice and was not easily intimidated. He spoke generally at first, about Sarah's quiet nature and her apparent distress. Mrs. O'Malley, with her sharp eyes, had already noticed Sarah's withdrawn demeanor and the subtle ways she tried to hide her arms. When Hawkeye gently broached the subject of the bruises, she confirmed her own suspicions, her face hardening with indignation. She promised to speak to other women in town, to quietly gather their observations and support for Sarah. Lastly, Hawkeye approached Old Man Hemlock, the blacksmith. Hemlock was a man of few words, but his integrity was unquestionable. Hawkeye laid out the facts plainly, appealing to Hemlock's sense of fairness. Hemlock, a silent observer of the town's happenings, had long held a quiet disdain for Jedediah's bluster and questionable ethics. He simply nodded, his eyes narrowed, and said, "Heard some whispers about Jedediah's temper. Didn't think it was this bad. We'll stand with the girl, Hawkeye." Slowly, painstakingly, a network of support began to form around Sarah. The whispers grew, no longer confined to the dusty corners of private homes, but weaving through the fabric of the town. Jedediah, oblivious in his self-importance, felt a subtle shift, a coolness in the usual greetings, an unreadable quality in the eyes of his neighbors. He dismissed it as the usual small-town gossip, unaware that a quiet storm was gathering, fueled by the courage of a lonely rancher and the silent suffering of a young woman. The plot thickens. Hawkeye is building his team, but Jedediah Blackwood won't go down without a fight. Keep following Sarah's journey to freedom. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel so you don't miss the next thrilling chapters of The Lonely Rancher and the Purple Marks. The day of reckoning arrived with a crisp, clear sky, a stark contrast to the brewing storm within the town. Hawkeye, accompanied by Dr. Thorne, Mrs. O'Malley, and Old Man Hemlock, walked purposefully towards Jedediah Blackwood's general store. Sarah, though still fearful, walked with a newfound strength, bolstered by the visible support of her allies. Inside the store, Jedediah was behind the counter, boasting loudly to a couple of customers about a recent business deal. His booming voice filled the small space, exuding his usual self-importance. As Hawkeye and his small group entered, the chatter died down. The air grew thick with tension, the other customers sensing the gravity of the moment. Jedediah's smile faltered as he recognized the somber faces approaching him. Well, if it isn't Hawkeye Miller," Jedediah sneered, his eyes narrowing at the unusual assembly. "And what brings this esteemed delegation to my humble establishment?" Hawkeye stepped forward, his voice low and steady, cutting through Jedediah's bluster. "We're here about Sarah, Jedediah." At the mention of her name, Jedediah's eyes flickered with a hint of fear, quickly replaced by a scowl. "What about the girl? She's my niece, my responsibility." "Your responsibility has left her with bruises and fear," Dr. Thorne interjected, stepping forward. "I have examined her, Jedediah, and documented her injuries." Jedediah's face flushed crimson. "This is slander, lies. The girl is ungrateful." Mrs. O'Malley, her hands on her hips, spoke with quiet fury. "We've all seen the way she flinches, Jedediah. We've seen her try to hide the marks. You've terrorized that girl." Old Man Hemlock, silent until now, simply fixed Jedediah with a steely gaze that spoke volumes. The other customers, once amused, now looked at Jedediah with suspicion, the whispers of the town finally coalescing into a unified accusation. Jedediah, cornered and exposed, began to bluster, but his usual confidence was gone, replaced by a desperate, trapped animal's anger. Jedediah Blackwood, realizing the weight of the accusations and the unified front against him, lashed out. He lunged at Hawkeye, a wild fury in his eyes. But Old Man Hemlock, despite his age, was quick. He intercepted Jedediah, his grip like iron, preventing any further escalation. The store erupted in a clamor as customers gasped and backed away. Sarah, though frightened, stood firm, her gaze unwavering as she watched her tormentor's desperate struggle. Hawkeye, maintaining his composure, addressed the now silent onlookers. This man has abused Sarah, his own niece, for too long. We have proof, and we have witnesses." He gestured to Dr. Thorne, who held up his medical notes, then to Mrs. O'Malley, who spoke of the common knowledge of Sarah's suffering. The townspeople, who had perhaps suspected but never acted, now saw the undeniable truth before their eyes. The moral fabric of their community, which Jedediah had so brazenly torn, demanded rectification. Sensing the shift in public opinion and the lack of support from his usual allies, Jedediah's bravado crumbled. His bluster turned to pleas, then to pathetic denials, but it was too late. The town, once beholden to his influence, now saw him for what he truly was. The sheriff, a man who had often turned a blind eye to Jedediah's less savory dealings, arrived, drawn by the commotion. Faced with the irrefutable evidence and the unified voice of the community, he had no choice but to act. Jedediah Blackwood was arrested, his protests echoing hollowly in the suddenly quiet general store. As the sheriff led him away, a collective sigh of relief seemed to sweep through the town. Sarah, her face streaked with tears, looked at Hawkeye, a silent, profound gratitude in her eyes. The lonely rancher, once a solitary figure on the plains, had ignited a spark of justice, proving that even in the rugged West, a community could stand together against injustice. In the weeks that followed Jedediah Blackwood's arrest, a quiet transformation swept through the town. Sarah, no longer living under the shadow of fear, began to blossom. The purple marks on her arms faded, replaced by the healthy glow of freedom. She found work with Mrs. O'Malley at the seamstress shop, her meticulous nature and newfound confidence making her an invaluable asset. The town, in a silent act of redemption, rallied around her, offering support and kindness that had been missing for so long. Hawkeye, the unexpected catalyst for change, found his own life subtly altered. He was no longer just the lonely rancher. The townspeople greeted him with respect, a silent acknowledgement of his courage. He still preferred the solitude of his ranch, but the quiet no longer felt so empty. Sarah continued to visit the ranch, not as a maid, but as a friend. She would bring Mrs. O'Malley's freshly baked pies, and they would sit on the porch, sharing stories, the vast Arizona landscape unfolding before them. Hawkeye, once a man of few words, found himself engaging in easy conversation with her, a comfortable rhythm developing between them. One afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Sarah looked out at the endless plains. "Thank you, Mr. Miller," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "You saved me." Hawkeye nodded, a rare, gentle smile gracing his lips. "You saved yourself, Sarah. I just helped clear the path." He learned that true strength wasn't just in taming wild horses or surviving the harsh elements, but in standing up for what was right, in offering a hand to those in need, and in finding connection in the vastness of the world. The town, once divided by fear and silence, had rediscovered its collective conscience, and the lonely rancher, who had dared to see the purple marks, had played an unforgettable role in its awakening. The sun set on a new horizon, promising a future not free of challenges, but filled with the unwavering spirit of a community that had chosen compassion over indifference and courage over fear. And that's the end of The Lonely Rancher and the Purple Marks. We hope you enjoyed this emotional and realistic journey. If you loved this story, please show your support by liking this video, leaving a comment, and most importantly, subscribing to our channel for more compelling narratives. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life.